Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Adcock. I'm an Evaluation and Research Officer at Interact for Health, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar. Interact is pleased to co-sponsor today's webinar with the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. As many of you have experienced in your work, policy change is dynamic, it's complex, and it often has a long time horizon. Throughout the advocacy and policy change process, how do you know if your efforts are working? And how do you use data and information to tell the story along the way? That's what we're going to start unpacking today at a very high level in today's webinar. We're excited to have the Innovation Network with us today to share their wealth of knowledge and experience evaluating advocacy and policy change efforts. Before we dive into content, I want to tell you a little about Interact for Health. We're a regional health foundation that serves 20 counties in Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. Our mission is to improve health by promoting health equity in our region through community engagement, grants, research, education, and policy. We currently focus on 3 strategic priorities: reducing tobacco use, addressing the opioid epidemic, and ensuring that children have access to health care through school-based health centers. As part of our education work, we offer skill-building classes like today's webinar through our Learning Center. You can go to the website you see here on the screen to learn more about our upcoming classes this year on topics such as nonprofit finance and developing a business plan. With that, I'll turn it over to our co-sponsor, Rochelle, from the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Rochelle Seeger here at the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. I'm honored to work as the Foundation's Community Health Research Officer on their data initiatives. The Foundation was founded in 2001. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization working to address the unmet health needs of Kentuckians. The Foundation does this by influencing policy, improving access to care, reducing health risks and disparities, and promoting health equity. As part of the Foundation's mission to support improved health of Kentuckians, we launched this training series we call Health for a Change. It was launched in 2011 to support the health nonprofits work going on across Kentucky. This training series has reached Kentuckians in all of Kentucky's 120 counties. Later this month, we'll be in Owensboro, Kentucky with an in-person workshop on working with the media. And in November, we have a webinar on preemption laws. The archives of all these Health for a Change events and the upcoming schedule is on the website you see posted there, healthy-ky.org. And as Kelly mentioned, I'm very honored to partner with Interact for Health on this webinar today. So here's a slide and here's our message for you. Just do it. We'd love to hear from you on this webinar. So please take a moment when a thought comes to you to chat in your questions and comments to our presenters on our webinar today. Don't leave your questions to the end. Just send them in via the chat function if you're on the web. Finally, a recording of this webinar and a PDF of the slide deck will be available at the healthy-ky.org website this afternoon. You can scroll down, and under the heading Past Health for a Change Events, you'll find the recording and the slide decks for your review later on. Now I'm thrilled to turn it over to our presenters today from Innovation Network. Welcome, Debbie and Alyssa.
Thanks, Rochelle. We are very excited to be here today and to have a chance to talk to you all about what we love, which is advocacy evaluation. But before we dive into advocacy evaluation, we wanted to briefly introduce ourselves. So my name is Debbie, and I'm the Associate Director here at Innovation Network. And I'm joined by my colleague Alyssa, an associate here at the firm. And we come from diverse backgrounds. So my background is in organizational psychology, and then I moved on to study more methodology, social science research methodology.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. And my name is Alyssa, and I have extensive experience in public health and child welfare, and I've been conducting evaluations here at Innovation Network on health equity and juvenile justice. And Debbie and I are both passionate about social change efforts and are so excited to partner today with Interact for Health and Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. We want to make this as engaging as possible, so I just want to reiterate Rochelle's point about please do use the comment box as you think of questions as we go on. And we have different points in the webinar where we'll stop and definitely want to interact with you directly.
Also, since this is a webinar and we are not using video, we included our pictures at the lower bottom. You'll see on the screen at the bottom of each slide. And you'll see the picture come up each time we switch. So when I start talking, as I am now, you'll see the Debbie little icon show up there. And then when Alyssa starts talking, you'll see her face as well to try to match the face to the voice. So we wanted to start by telling you a little bit about Innovation Network. So Innovation Network is an evaluation and research consulting firm, and we specialize in advocacy and public policy evaluation, and we maintain a diverse client portfolio in the areas of advocacy and social movements, health and health equity, theory of change and evaluation planning, social justice, and data visualization. We have over 25 years of experience providing evaluation and capacity building expertise to the nonprofit and philanthropic community. We specialize really in helping nonprofits and their funders develop their ability to define success, measure their results, and ultimately improve their effectiveness in their program and advocacy efforts. So before we jump into the webinar, we wanted to share with you our advocacy evaluation learning plan. Our goal is to provide a foundational knowledge about advocacy evaluation to better support you in your work and to strengthen the health of the advocacy field. So today's introductory webinar will really provide this high-level overview of advocacy evaluation, and we're going to give you actually a case example to really situate it, to give you a sense of what it actually looks like in action. And on October 25th, we will be facilitating a half-day in-person workshop that will really delve into the evaluation framework, planning, and methods, and we really plan to make this day hands-on and applicable. We acknowledge that many of you will not be attending, and I think it may be full, but we're going to let you, if you're not attending, that's okay. We have many resources that we're going to provide at the end of our webinar.
In the next hour, we are going to touch on 3 topics. We're going to talk about important evaluation concepts, touch on why it's important to evaluate in the first place, and describe the evaluation cycle. We're going to talk about advocacy evaluation and what makes it unique. And we'll walk through a real-life example of advocacy evaluation that Debbie and I are working on right now, and really be transparent about what that looks like and some of the challenges that we face in doing that work. And so we are excited that some of you joining the webinar will be able to attend that in-person workshop and get a little more information about advocacy evaluation. And for you, the webinar is especially important so that we all start off on the same page when we meet in person, regardless of your background or experience with advocacy evaluation. We just want to start with a quick overview of evaluation and why it's important to use evaluation regularly in our work. It's important that we all have the same definition for what we're talking about today and for when we gather at the end of the month. And when we talk about evaluation, we're defining it as systematic, a structured, intentional way of looking at the quality or value of something. And really, that something could be anything. It could be people, projects, policies, products, processes. And today, we'll be talking specifically about evaluating advocacy initiatives. You'll see that there's a similar structure for evaluation in general with specific considerations that need to be given to advocacy. In general, we evaluate because evaluation provides a process and tools to learn about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and the difference that you're making. Evaluation can be a planning tool. It can provide information that helps you know what population or policy to prioritize or how to re-strategize your efforts. It can help you communicate internally or externally and clearly describe what your organization is doing in a concrete way for funders, staff, your community, or other audiences. It's also a way to track the progress that you're making towards your goals and measure impact. Evaluation lets you learn in an ongoing way so that you can improve your work and make it more effective. And we all hope that the work that we're doing is having an impact, and one purpose of evaluation is to test those assumptions so that we all have about what works and to adapt when we find out that we're wrong or we're off track. So we just want to take a moment to hear from you and what your priorities are when you are considering evaluation. So in a moment, we're going to have a quick poll pop up on your screen. So please select the option that best describes your #1 reason for evaluating. And these will follow the same common reasons that we just discussed. Plan and adjust your program strategies, communicate, or show impact. And we recognize that you may evaluate for all these reasons, but please choose the one that you believe is prioritized most at your organization. We also have an other category there, so please feel free to click that and add in the chat if there's another reason that you evaluate.
There it is. I think it just popped up. Sorry, we had a little bit of a technical difficulty.
Yeah, I see some responses coming in. It looks like the majority of you are evaluating in order to show impact. That's definitely an important piece of evaluation. And I think it's really important, especially when you consider there's a lot of funders who really value the impact and showing the impacts of the work that you're doing.
And we understand that it's hard to pick one or the other, because I'm sure many of you are needing it for all. So I know we did this forced choice is not ideal and really not that realistic. We just wanted to see what you prioritize.
Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat there's a couple of responses for other. One person mentioned to inform future policy. That's a great one. Okay. Thanks, everyone. We're going to continue on.
So now we want to talk a little bit about how we go about conducting evaluations. So while each evaluation is different, evaluators tend to follow a similar process or framework to guide their work. And I'm sure many of you have heard or have kind of talked about evaluation, and this will sound familiar. We hope to give you a little bit of tidbits into kind of how we think and how we approach this work. So this framework is traditionally called the evaluation lifecycle. And as you see here, the evaluation lifecycle consists of 6 stages. Starting from the top left on the screen, we start with engaging the stakeholders, then you're moving to the right, describing the initiative, then you're focusing the evaluation design, then you're going down, lower right is gathering credible evidence, justifying conclusions, and ensuring use and lessons learned. So really this is supposed to be a circle, but we wanted to look kind of, it looks a little funky on the screen, but it's really meant to be more of that circle, cyclical look. And it's a cycle because the goal is for this work to be ongoing and for each phase to inform the next one. So you will notice that equity surrounds the entire evaluation cycle, highlighting the importance of taking context into account and ensuring equity in our work. Now Alyssa and I will really spend some time talking through each phase of the work. We're going to focus on its definition and share with you some key questions or concepts that we as evaluators keep in mind when we approach our work and that we recommend that you do as well. So first one is engaging stakeholders. So this first stage, it's important to consider all the parties that have a stake in the evaluation. Stakeholders should really be engaged to ensure that their perspectives are heard and to gain that buy-in. If stakeholders are not engaged, the evaluation may not address their questions or values, leading stakeholders to possibly ignore, criticize, or even resist the evaluation, and ultimately not using it. So when engaging with stakeholders, what should you keep in mind? Well, first you should keep in mind, who are these stakeholders? So you need to identify the persons or the organizations that have that investment in what will be learned from the evaluation. You also need to identify their role and interest and differentiate their level of involvement in this work. You need to think about equity again when engaging with stakeholders to ensure that all voices are heard. You also have to think about what approach you would use to engage these stakeholders. So really, what aspects of the evaluation would you include them in? So would you include them in the design, in the data collection, the analysis? And who would you include when? Also, how would you engage with them? By phone, in person, email check-ins? This really all depends on interest, location, capacity, and resources. And sometimes we assume all these things, and we shouldn't. We should ask and really engage in that conversation. And another thing to keep in mind are what factors might help or hinder your engagement. So stakeholder time and interest. So moving on to the second phase, which is describing the initiative. Doing this is critical as it sets a frame of reference for the evaluation. It also creates a common understanding and agreement of the program or initiative's purpose and goals, both kind of within the team and also across, so with the evaluator as well. So without this foundation, evaluations may not be conducted or used effectively. So what should we keep in mind here? One is there a plan that lays out what you intend to do, how you intend to do it, and the goals the organization is working towards? And it seems simple, or it seems like it should be, everyone should have it, but we've noticed that many organizations don't. And this could really be in the form of a theory of change, a logic model, an advocacy agenda, strategic plan, or something else. It's also important to be clear on language and definitions, especially in advocacy. Maybe create a glossary. It's surprising how often team members assume everyone is defining a concept differently when in fact that is not the case. Fidelity of implementation. It's important to think about whether the program is in fact being implemented as planned. And finally, it is important to define what success looks like and begin to identify some indicators to help operationalize that success. And again, it's always critical to identify the context in which the program or initiative operates and to pull out those assumptions collectively. So once you have a clear picture of the initiative, you can begin designing the evaluation. The evaluation should be designed keeping stakeholder interest, context, evaluation expertise, and resources in mind. A plan should anticipate possible changes or modification to the initiative, and the evaluator should always be ready to readjust accordingly. So, when designing the evaluation, what should you keep in mind? Purpose of the evaluation. For example, is this evaluation meant for learning, assessment, storytelling, accountability? So kind of like what we just asked in the poll, why? Why do you want this evaluation done? Users. It's important to note who will be using this evaluation. What other stakeholders may be tangentially affected by this evaluation? Methods. What methods should be used, keeping in mind the evaluation questions, resources, and time? And timeline. What is the time allotted for this evaluation? What is the timeline for the initiative? And it may change over time. When do stakeholders need information by? Roles and responsibilities of the stakeholders. So how will the stakeholders be involved? Who's your key point person? Who do you include and when? And then finally, yet again, context. How are you going to ensure context is understood and integrated into the evaluation?
So it's now in stage 4 of the evaluation cycle, after you've developed an intentional evaluation design, that you're really ready to begin collecting data. And so to ensure that you're fair and representative, you really should be systematic in the way that you collect information and collect data from everyone involved. You should also strive to use multiple methods to answer the same questions, just as a check. If you're getting the same answer across methods, you know that it's the right answer. When you're gathering evidence, keep in mind what data you might already have access to. Consider existing data sets, documents, or people who can provide that information that you need. Make sure that you know where your data are coming from, though, and that you trust the data that you collect. So if you don't know the source or how numbers were calculated, try to find out. And it's also important to think about the resources you need, things like staff time and skills. For example, the skills to run queries and analyze data in a database. You may also decide that you need additional data collection tools, for example, updating a sign-in sheet to ask for the information that you need. The next stage in the evaluation cycle is to justify your conclusions. And it's in this stage where you explain what the data means. And this should be done in a way that takes into account the perspectives of the people who gave you the data that you're basing all of your conclusions on. In this stage, keep in mind the values of your stakeholders and think about which stakeholders' values that you're naturally drawn to. We often find ourselves drawn to data that we relate to more and from the people that we maybe understand a little better. And it's really our job to design a process for analyzing and interpreting that data where we can prevent any bias that may come into our work. And as evaluators, we often like to have a sense-making process that can help with this, that really involves key stakeholders with different perspectives, so that when we analyze the data, it's through all of their eyes and not just our own. And often it helps to develop this plan before data are even collected at the start of an evaluation. The final stage of the evaluation cycle is to take what you've learned and to share it with those who need to know and ensure that what you've learned is being applied to the work. And so this is really what you've been working towards. You weren't evaluating to create a report, you were evaluating to learn, to improve, to show impact, and it's also our job to make sure that these things happen. In this stage, you should keep in mind that you may not have got it all right. You may have missed something. So once you share your findings, others may have additional helpful information that they're able to share with you. So think about how you can create space for others to provide that feedback. It's also important to get information out to those who can use it in a timely way before that information gets stale. Make sure that you're taking the audience into account when you do that. So when you do share, are your data presented in a way that's easy to understand, and is it unbiased? Finally, make a plan to follow up on the evaluation. Check in to see if your data are being used appropriately. And you can also check in to see what's changed or what new data are available. With advocacy evaluation in particular, changing context can change the relevancy and the utility of information. Okay, so again, here are the 6 stages of the evaluation cycle that we just went through. And so for those of you attending the in-person workshop later this month, we'll go deeper into these 3 teal areas, describing the initiative, focusing the evaluation design, and gathering credible evidence. Okay, and I know that was a lot, so I just want to take a quick pause here. Are there any questions that we can help answer at this time? So please feel free to write them in the chat box. Okay, I see one question. What stage of the cycle has been most challenging and why?
So that's a good question. I think in advocacy evaluation, the most challenging has been describing the initiative. I think it changes over time. It's constantly evolving, and we've noticed also with teams that we've worked, they've also kind of had a hard time getting a grasp on what they're doing at what point. So that has been the most challenge, to stay alongside. Sometimes we're feeling like we're running behind them, and we're trying to stay alongside them on a race, and sometimes it's hard to stay alongside them. So that's our ultimate goal, is to stay right beside you as you're running your race, and to really be clear on what you're doing and when you're doing it.
Yeah, and advocacy, so much changes all the time. Like, we're working on one evaluation right now where even like the team members, not just the team members, but what the coalition is changing. So it's kind of divided, and it used to be we're looking at one group of people, and now we're looking at multiple groups of people. And so that kind of always makes a challenge for the evaluator as well.
We have a question here. Will you have examples of evaluations at the in-person meetings? And yes, absolutely. We're actually going to give you an example today that's more process, but we'll give you more examples at the in-person workshop that may talk more about that impact piece as well.
Exactly.
All right.
Okay. Thank you. Keep the questions coming. If you have them, just write them in the chat box, and we'll keep answering them.
Now that we gave a broad overview of evaluation, we wanted to delve into advocacy evaluation and really unpack its uniqueness. So what makes it different from other evaluation approaches? So advocacy evaluation is a systematic process of inquiry to assess the process by which we influence social change. Social change efforts can include anything from public education to leadership development to relationship building, power building, and lobbying. And as you can see, these are very big things that are very hard to measure. So we wanted to walk through a few elements of advocacy evaluation that are more relevant in this space that we've gathered through our experience and some of the research we've done in this space. So the first one is flexible boundaries. So the parameters of the advocacy initiative may change as a result of partnerships or external factors. So for example, if the administration changes, the initiative may adjust to focus on defensive versus offensive tactics. And this really may affect the evaluation process and timeline. Another element of advocacy evaluation is uncertain time frame. So because advocacy, again, depends on the external factors and environmental factors that cannot be controlled, the time frame of the initiative and evaluation may change often. Interim goals. And this is particularly important if you want to measure impact or outcomes. Since advocacy's long-term goals are relatively far into the future, advocates really need interim measures of success. So these serve as milestones to show work is on track, keeping you informed about progress, and help you share success stories along the way to that big win. Success can look different. So definition of success can change depending on the environment. So it's important to keep this in mind, and it's important to stay in tune with the environmental changes and circle back on these definitions throughout the evaluation. So for example, as we mentioned before, if you go from the offensive to defensive tactics, that completely changes the course of what success may look like to you. Contribution versus not attribution. This is a hot topic right now within the evaluation space as we're looking to think more methodologically how to approach this. But in advocacy, there's rarely one individual organization that can claim victory. And organizations are often part of a partnership or coalitions. And so in some rarely can anyone, quote unquote, own the win as theirs alone. It's also incredibly costly and very difficult to prove that you alone were responsible for bringing about this advocacy victory. That said, advocacy evaluation approaches have been fine-tuned on how to measure contribution, and we think that doing these and measuring contribution really can help you find useful information without alienating partners or really using up resources unnecessarily. And the sixth element is that methods should fit the work. So while this is the case for all evaluation efforts, it is particularly relevant for advocacy evaluation given the flexibility, fast-paced, contextualized nature of this work. So it is critical to identify methods that can capture the real-time, nuanced nature of this work, and this can often result in non-experimental or participatory evaluation methods. And we're actually going to walk you through a case that used this type of approach, kind of the non-experimental participatory methods. So we wanted to take a quick pause here and see if anyone had any thoughts or questions or reflections on these elements or additional elements that we did not include. Okay, so, oh, that's great. Okay, so we have a question here. What are examples of interim goals? And we're actually going to walk you through some examples with our case of specific interim goals that we could, or indicators that show. So we could, we'll talk through more about that. Yes, so we can talk a little bit more about contribution versus attribution. So traditionally, you know, when you're doing an evaluation, you are evaluating one actor or one program. And I know that in general, in evaluation, you're always part of a larger ecosystem, but you're looking for the specific influences of that particular actor. In this case, in this world of advocacy, we don't place the assumption under that one actor, and so we're not looking at those influences. So, for example, when you're dealing with contribution work, network mapping and systems mapping are different expertise and approaches that we have to implement into our work to ensure where the power is, who's doing what, and how all these networks are interrelated. So that's just one example of additional thinking or processes or approaches that we have to bring into the picture when you're doing more of that contribution analysis work.
Right, yeah, and advocacy in particular is so important, and so often you work in broad coalitions with so many different people who are working in tandem towards, you know, the same one policy goal, and so each organization tends to have their own strengths. So that's what contribution really focuses on too, like what those strengths are and to what degree did that support the ultimate goal?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we want to take another minute and hear from you. So again, we're just going to go through what the question is, and we'll have the poll pop up in a second. But we are interested to learn how these elements affect you and your work. And so is there a particular element that we just went through that speaks to you, that particularly affects the way that you do your work? And so please answer this poll question: which advocacy evaluation element is most relevant to the way that you conduct your work? So you know your answers are confidential. This is just to help you get thinking about the nuances of advocacy evaluation, for us to get a little more information that will help us prepare for the in-person workshop.
We skip to the results.
Okay, look at this. Okay, success can look different. That is the winner here. Oh, it's rapidly changing. Interim goals, contribution, not attribution are all things. So it seems like folks think a little less about the flexible boundaries and uncertain timeline. And that's interesting. I think those are pretty related.
Yeah, and it makes me think that as evaluators, that's what's on our minds, because we always have to be following, as an external party, just being on top of it. But if you're in the work, it might not be it might be more second nature and a part of the work that you're doing.
Flows.
Yeah, and you're more aware of it. For us, it's a big challenge to stay on top of it.
Yep. And I see another person had a question pop up. What if I don't have the skills or funding to hire an evaluator to do the things like network mapping that you're talking about? Yep. That is a great question. And so I'm glad you picked up on that. That we are external evaluators. That is our role. So we spend all our time evaluating. And we understand that most of you are coming from a place where evaluation is just a part of the larger work that you're doing. And so what we're hoping to do today is to give you some great key takeaways that you're able to incorporate into your work, no matter at what stage or experience that you are. So I think there's always some evaluation work that you can embed into your ongoing work, because really ultimately evaluation is to support you and your mission, and really to help you do your day-to-day work.
Yeah, and to follow up on the network piece, there's network mapping light, if you will, where they're different, it's more of a way to engage and to talk, and it's not as intense of interviewing and actually using different platforms. It's a little bit a more user-friendly, kind of approachable way to really get at this relationship piece.
Yeah, and actually I talk to some advocates all the time who don't even realize that they're doing evaluation, and they are. Like, I'll talk to advocates and they'll say, oh, I'm having conversations with different people in my network, and I'm getting like this certain sense that like this is an issue. And my point to them is, you're having all these great conversations. There's a way you can systematize that. Just like pull up in a simple Excel spreadsheet, write down who you talked to, what some of the key issues were. At the end, you can kind of synthesize that. Maybe you come back to it quarterly and you see what the different issues are. And that's a very light, easy way for you to systematize those everyday conversations that you're having and highlight what are the key issues that are coming out here. Okay, so at a high level, advocacy evaluation can look like other evaluations, and it often follows the same foundational framework that we just went through, the evaluation cycle. But the approach really has to be adapted to account for those unique elements that we've been talking about. So Debbie and I are going to go through an example of a real advocacy evaluation that we're working on right now, keeping in mind what we mentioned about how we know that we're coming from this place where we're external evaluators, and that your evaluation is on an ongoing way, and it's embedded into your work. And so we want to pull out those key takeaways for you. And so you'll see through this example that advocacy evaluation is about a lot more than just data tracking. So this evaluation is a 3-year evaluation of 3 state-level campaigns working to close youth prisons. And our evaluation is about a year into that process. And so the evaluation was directed by a funder of all the campaigns, and they wanted to help the campaigns reflect and learn from their work both internally and across all the states so that they could improve strategy and see what progress that they were making. They also wanted to document the best practices and the lessons learned and think of the different information that's really helpful for them to share with future similar campaigns with the same mission. And so we won't be sharing any identifying information, but we will be extremely candid about the process that we went through the evaluation. And as we go through, we'll focus on what we did, why we did it, and the key takeaways. So you'll see through the course of our process for this evaluation that it doesn't really beautifully follow that nice evaluation life cycle that we just laid out. It's really not an exact science. So even though we showed it in that packaged way, in reality, advocacy is really messy, and evaluation of advocacy is also messy. So we still use each of these elements in the evaluation cycle, just not necessarily in that order, and sometimes they happen at the same time. And so each component, we really want you to see it as a tool in your toolbox, and you just have to be flexible about how and when you apply each one. And we'll talk about how you know when to be flexible. So most evaluations start with a big question. And for us as external evaluators, those questions are often given to us, and that was the case for this evaluation of the 3 state campaigns. For you, you may have some big questions that you're already thinking about as a natural course of your work. And the evaluative process is really to define that big question by designing concrete evaluation questions that guide the work. And the big question that we started with for this evaluation was, what can funders, advocates, and the field learn from this model of advocacy? And so we designed some evaluation questions that broke this down a little further. So our questions were, what are state campaigns doing? So what are their goals? What are their strategies? How do they actually carry out the work? What's working? What are milestones and successes that the campaigns have achieved in the past year specifically? So what brought about that change? What was the change important? How has the campaign's capacity changed in the last year? What factors have contributed to milestones or successes? So what's going on in the context of the campaign that helps or hurts them? And finally, how has the TA provider contributed to the state campaigns? And so this initiative included technical support. And so how did they help, and what services or supports did they provide that were beneficial? In terms of methodology, we built into the evaluation design time to focus these questions further with the funder and the campaigns. And we also decided that we would answer the questions through an in-person reflection meeting. We answered it through interviews with people working on or related to the campaign, and also brought in people with a perspective across all of the campaigns. And our formal plan for sharing all the findings was through a webinar and a final report, and we'll touch on all of those as we walk through the evaluation. So there were a few things that we did not include in this design. You may have noticed some traditional evaluation methods were left out, and that's really because we felt that a more qualitative case study approach was better suited to answering the questions that we had. And for this evaluation, we decided not to include a survey since they really wanted that rich story. But we could have taken the approach to survey those involved with state campaigns and potentially access a larger sample if we had less money, or if we had less time, or if we had prioritized thinking about the breadth of the campaign rather than by going really deep into the 3 state campaigns. And for this evaluation, we're also not directly supporting the state campaigns to identify indicators or tracking specific outcomes, which just wasn't a priority for the funder at this point in time. But we've provided some hands-on support during the reflection meeting to campaigns directly, and we also offered discussion questions to help campaigns think more critically about how data can support their efforts. It's really important to note here that not all evaluations are designed to track outcomes and measure impact. So for example, this was not the focus of this evaluation. If we were tracking outcomes, we would have gotten a lot more clarity about the campaign's expected outcomes. What did they expect to achieve? For example, if we were tracking outcomes for the state campaigns, we would have decided on specific interim outcomes, which could have been something like policy decisions related to youth prison closures, number of legislative champions seeking alternatives to youth prisons, and number of community members engaged in campaign efforts. So you'll notice only one of those was really policy related. All the others was about gaining momentum, and that's really what interim outcomes are. They're about the different steps that you need to achieve in order to get to that policy goal.
We're going to pause here and take a question. So there was a question here, this evaluation example is around the structure of the model, not necessarily the effectiveness of the campaign. It's interesting here because it's a little bit about both. I know it's not specifically about measuring outcomes, but they are looking through as they're working and really figuring out their process, they're identifying the successes. They're defining, and we're defining successes alongside with them. And with those successes, as they're defined, they're shared with other campaigns. And so they say, oh, we appeared to be successful here, and this is how we did it. And there's a lot of learning and sharing across. So it's really not about really clean cut. We identify those outcomes ahead of time, as Alyssa had mentioned, and then we're coming in to measure them. We're really with them, helping them think through the process, what they're doing, what are the successes that they are seeing coming along, why are they envisioning those to be successes, and then sharing those learnings across. We also focus a lot on the challenges as well. So because this is, as everyone knows, this is a very difficult space. Juvenile justice is a very difficult space to be in, and they're constantly experiencing challenges within their states. And they learn from each other across states as well about what's working and what's not and how they can support that. So to give you a little bit on a challenge that they learned, for example, is about partnering and who to partner with. So initially they really wanted to partner with more conservative allies or individuals that could be more influential. But they realized they need to think about when to partner with these people and how to partner. And this was something that we worked through, and we learned with them what the successful partnerships look like and how do we enable that.
Mm-hmm.
So as Alyssa said, we kind of designed, and once that design was approved and funding was secured, we launched the project through kickoff meetings with key stakeholders. So in this case, our stakeholders were the program funder, the TA provider, and the state campaign leads. So we first held a kickoff meeting with the program funder and the TA provider to get a clearer sense of the broader efforts across the states, to finalize the evaluation design and timeline, and to decide on the 3 state campaigns that we're going to evaluate, since the funder is actually funding multiple states across the country. So deciding on the specific 3 states was actually no easy task, as we had to really deeply investigate what our evaluation priorities were and define a criteria by which we were going to select those states. So where are they in the process, the political landscape, and overall capacity. So once the key states were in fact identified, we held individual kickoff meetings with each state campaign to clarify the scope of the evaluation, to gain a deeper understanding of their work and their state context, and really to check in as well on their internal team dynamics, because as external evaluators, that's something that we're not as privy to as, for example, you would be coming in for more of that internal space. So for both meetings, it is important to be intentional about including diverse perspectives in the room, inviting individuals who were involved in different aspects of the work and have varying levels of power. So for example, we invited a campaign lead, a youth leader, a communications representative. So including these voices at the onset of the evaluation really provides a more holistic understanding of the work and the voices, but really it also provides a foundation for ensuring an equitable evaluation, that your work is equitable. Recognizing that the evaluation can often be an extra, even burdensome task, we authentically discussed the state's bandwidth and proactively looked for ways to infuse the evaluation into their efforts. So we looked at what are they currently doing, when are they strategizing, convening, and let's really engage in that work rather than put them aside and ask them to do more time and more work. As external evaluators, this is really difficult, primarily because it takes time to build trust, and so you don't get included into their current work. But I think as for someone who's more internal, this might be something that take advantage of and really embed in the work. So I want to take a pause. I wanted to clarify on what the TA provider does. So the TA provider is an organization that works as a strategist that has an understanding of the juvenile justice system from all different levels, from the policy level, from the youth level, from the actual the departments level. And so they're there to provide strategy support, to provide to networking, to convene the states across the states, and to even provide a helping hand in situations in which they need to be on the ground and working. This TA provider is there with them in support and just jumping from state to state to state, helping these states and bringing them together year after year.
Yeah, and TA stands for technical assistance.
Yes,
so they provide technical support.
Yeah. So since our evaluation questions were process-driven, we felt that facilitating an all-day reflection meeting with each state would really accomplish many goals at once. So one, it would provide us with a deeper understanding of each state campaign's effort. It would also help build a shared understanding amongst the campaign team. And this is something that you think that they would be doing it together, but they sometimes need additional support because they're all kind of working on different things. And a perfect example in our case was that they didn't have clear names. They didn't even know what their name was. Some themselves called them a Closure Coalition, others had a different name, and we were confused as to who was a part of who, and this is something that we helped them sort out. And third, really to offer an opportunity for the campaigns to reflect on their current work and successes and challenges, and to really begin pushing their work forward. So it's not only about understanding what they're doing, but also thinking strategically and moving forward. So to ensure this learning, we implemented activities and approaches that provided us with the data we needed, so the documentation that the funder would like, while simultaneously giving the states an opportunity to really collectively reflect and challenge on their work. And we know this time is super coveted because we know with advocacy, having that time to really reflect as a team is often limited. So in designing our reflection meeting, we had two key takeaways. One is fitting the methods to the work. So we used a participatory approach that engaged at all age levels, demographics, and experience. And as mentioned, we designed it in such a way where both us and them can benefit from our time together. Another key takeaway is really having that strong facilitator in the room. That facilitator can be a part of the organization, but ideally it has to be someone who is not so intimately involved in the work. The role of a facilitator, as we believe, is to create a productive dialogue by being inclusive of all perspectives, bring passion and excitement to the room, really allow for that necessary discourse, and in the end, really to push that conversation forward. Yeah, so we have a bunch of questions coming in. We'll address those very soon. We just wanted to kind of finish off the case quickly, and we'll circle back to the questions. So we want to talk a little bit about the interviewing process. So to complement this data, we also conducted interviews with state campaigns, 5 in each state, and then a few interviews, 6 to be exact, at the national level. So at the state level, we interviewed campaign team members, close-in partners, and the youth, some of the youth that have been integral to the campaign efforts. At the national level, we interviewed the TA providers, so it's a team of a few of them, the advisory board members, youth advocates, and policy advisory council members. And a lot of these individuals we were given, the TA provider as well as the funder gave us some of these individuals. These interviews provided us with this additional insight and perspective and offered really another data source to complement the reflection meetings. It also gave a safe space for individuals to share more sensitive or provocative thoughts and experiences. So when interviewing, the key takeaway, it is important to be purposeful about who you interview given time constraints. So if possible, it would be good to gather data from multiple sources since interviewing takes a lot of time and money. And in our case, we included perspectives that were not in the room during the reflection meeting, and we were also intentional about individuals who hold diverse roles. It's also important to bring perspectives to get at the breadth and depth. So we had also a zoomed out perspective. So we had, for example, unlikely allies that participated or voices that are more in the policy space. To analyze all of this information that we'd collected so far, we revisited our evaluation questions and looked at the data within and across all of the states. And then we identified themes. What were some of the commonalities and differences between them? We developed high-level findings, and we presented them in a webinar to the funder and to representatives from each state. And so our intent was to share our findings and hold a discussion. In full transparency, this did not work out so well. We realized afterwards that it was just too much to ask in one sitting. We needed to allow time for processing of the information. And we also realized that a webinar was not the best format for a rich discussion. We had people on video, and we saw some people were in the car, some with children in the car. It gets a little dangerous. But a key takeaway here is really to be intentional about how you want to present your findings. So think about your audience and how you would like it to be used. For us, we're looking at other options to the webinar and changing the way that we present the data and have conversations about them. And although the webinar did not work for this discussion-based forum that we were hoping for, we did provide some discussion questions that we shared during the webinar that have been pretty useful. And so these were designed to help campaigns engage in our findings and on their own in an ongoing way and with the support of that TA technical assistance provider. So our next interaction with states occurred 3 months later. And at this time, we held separate video conferences with each state campaign. Essentially, these were video discussions that we built around the themes that we'd identified and discussed during the cross-state webinar. And the purpose of the call was not only to allow individual states to delve into their work, but also for us to gather more data from them. And this step of the evaluation was not part of the original plan, and originally we'd planned for another webinar presentation, but we thought it would be more effective to use that time to have a discussion. And the takeaway here is to be open to assessing your scope based on what works and the stakeholder needs. And having that ongoing dialogue with stakeholders can help you know when flexibility is really needed. And our change was made in collaboration with the funder. So be reflective about the process and how things are going, and be open to pivoting. And finally, reporting is an essential element of any evaluation. This is how you share all that information and make sure that it's used in the way that it's intended. And you've seen in our example that we're constantly in communication with the primary stakeholders involved, which is the funder, that TA provider, and the campaigns. And they're receiving information from us in both formal and informal ways the whole time. And so this constant communication helps us to know when we need to adjust our approach to the evaluation because something's not working, because they tell it to us explicitly. But it also shows what's important for them to know, what do they need to know to do their work, what's important to them, and what should we highlight as that evaluation unfolds. And so for this campaign, the final product will be a final report that looks across all of the states. And it's going to be shared with everyone, all the stakeholders. And we'll be doing that again in the next 2 years. And the report at the end of the 3 years will be able to reflect on the changes and the progress that the campaign experienced over that time. Yeah. And so our report, in the end, it's not going to be full of data and graphs. It's really going to be highlighting that story, which does include those policy wins, but also the momentum that they build over that time.
So we're very short on time. So there's a few questions in the chat, so we want to address maybe one of those.
Yeah, I think the one we'll address, it talks about how we spend a lot of time facilitating and organizing as opposed to strictly evaluating. I think it's a great question. I want to address really quickly, and we'd love to talk about it more, especially in the in-person workshop. But really, we like to be facilitating, and that's one of our ways to gather evidence and gather data. So we talk to you about how we get the data and the different approaches, but then we go back to our little desks and we start systematizing, creating an understanding and creating themes and analyzing this information, and then really sending it back to them in a way that they can digest and think about it and reflect and move their work forward. Because there's a lot happening at different states within and across, and we're really there to help gather all that data, assess it, and give it back to them in a way that helps them push this work forward. In this case, yes, it was not an outcome or impact, so we're not telling them whether they've achieved that success or not, really telling them what's working and what's not collectively.
Yeah, and I do want to emphasize here that evaluation can be a story. Evaluation doesn't need to be a number, especially with advocacy evaluation, because so much is changing all the time, because success looks different. You're not striving towards one final number of like X number of policy wins. Sometimes you're trying to block legislation. Maybe one moment you are winning policies and the next you're trying to block. And so telling that story through evaluation is really important so people understand what your work looks like and what you're tackling, so that they understand even what success looks like when you describe it to them.
All right, so we're at time, so we wanted to quickly show you that we have some resources, and we can send that out to you as well. So this is really a hub for a bunch of advocacy resources that we have put together in one place. So please feel free to take a look at this. And really, we want to turn it back to Kelly to give us some final messages.
Thank you so much, Debbie and Alyssa. That was a great overview. I know it skimmed the surface, but it gave me a lot to think about and to integrate into my work in small ways. So now that you've heard about evaluation and its importance for the last hour, please help us with ours. You'll get a survey link via email after the webinar, so please take the time to complete that. Here's our contact information on behalf of Interact for Health, the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky, and Innovation Network. Thank you so much for joining today, and we look forward to seeing many of you at the in-person workshop on October 25th. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.